everyone. Welcome back for another deep dive. You know how we all get hooked on those serial killer documentaries? Well, turns out a lot of what we think we know is completely off base.
It really is remarkable how much fiction seeps into the public consciousness.
So today we're going straight to the source. The FBI's own training manual for profiling and investigating serial murders. And let me tell you, it is fascinating stuff. I mean, forget those Hollywood cliches. We're talking about real-life insights into what makes these cases tick.
Absolutely. And frankly, it's information everyone should have,
Yeah.
just in case you ever find yourself. Well, hopefully not.
Right, haha, exactly. Let's hope not. But for those of us with the true crime obsession, this is pure gold. So to kick things off, let's dismantle some of those persistent serial killer stereotypes, shall we? Like, how about that classic image of the creepy loner? Is that even remotely accurate?
Honestly, not even close. You see, a lot of these individuals are masters of deception. They blend seamlessly into everyday life. They might have families, jobs, even be active members of their community. It's all a calculated act to appear normal, to avoid raising any red flags.
So it's like they weaponize normalcy? That's chilling, and it makes their crimes even more shocking, right? Because they completely shatter our expectations of what evil should look like.
You hit the nail on the head. Take Dennis Rader, the BTK killer, for instance, family man, church leader. No one in his community would have ever suspected him of being capable of such horrific acts.
It really is the ultimate betrayal of trust. And that reminds me of Robert Yates, too. You know, the decorated pilot burying bodies in his own backyard. Cases like that really make you question everything.
And this whole loner trope feeds into another misconception, that serial killers are predominantly white males.
Which is, again, totally off base.
Right, 100%. The FBI's own data reveals a much more diverse picture.
I mean, you have Charles Eng, Derek Todd Lee, Coral Watts cases that span different races, cultures, backgrounds. It's a stark reminder that evil doesn't discriminate.
Precisely.
Yeah.
It underscores the need to focus on behavioral patterns, the psychology, rather than relying on surface-level assumptions. And that actually segues into another myth we need to address, that all serial murders are fueled by some kind of twisted sexual desire.
Oh, yeah. Hollywood definitely loves that narrative.
It's a common misconception, but the reality is far more nuanced. The motivations behind these crimes are complex and often multifaceted. Sometimes it's about power and control. Like in the DC sniper case, Muhammad and Malvo, they seem to be driven by a need to instill fear, to hold an entire region hostage through terror.
It's like they saw themselves as puppeteers, toying with people's lives. So chilling. And then you have cases like Dr. Michael Swango, where even after all this time, the motive remains a complete mystery. Dozens of suspected poisonings, and we still don't fully understand why.
It's unsettling, isn't it? A stark reminder that we may never fully unlock the darkest corners of the human psyche. Some cases simply defy easy explanations.
So if we can't always pinpoint a single clear-cut motive, how do investigators even begin to approach these cases?
That's where the FBI's emphasis on observable behavior comes in, focusing on the patterns that emerge at crime scenes, the methodology, the victim selection process.
Ah, so less speculation, more hard evidence.
Exactly, because those details, they paint a more reliable picture than any armchair psychology ever could. And speaking of misleading narratives, we have to talk about that image of the serial killer as this nomadic, almost mythical figure drifting from town to town in search of victims.
Right, like a shark that has to keep moving.
Yeah, that's a popular one, but it's largely a Hollywood fabrication. The FBI's research actually shows that most serial killers operate within what they call comfort zones.
Comfort zones. Interesting. Can you elaborate on that a bit? What does that actually mean in this context?
It refers to a geographical area where the killer feels a sense of familiarity and control. It might be their neighborhood, their workplace, or even a specific route they travel frequently. The key is that they're operating in an environment where they feel they can minimize risk and blend in.
So it's like a predator staking out their hunting ground. Ugh, that just sent chills down my spine. And it totally debunks that whole myth of the transient killer, doesn't it?
Right. You think about a case like Gary Ridgway, the Green River Killer. He preyed on women in an area he knew intimately, basically his backyard, for years. And that familiarity, that warped sense of comfort, made him incredibly difficult to catch.
Okay, so we've officially busted some myths here, but before we go any further, let's get down to basics. How does the FBI actually define serial murder? What are the specific criteria?
It's actually much simpler than you might think. The FBI defines serial murder as two or more separate murders committed by the same offender or offenders, with a significant period of time between each event. That's the key.
Interesting. So it's all about establishing that clear pattern of distinct killings. We don't need to get bogged down in the weeds of like cooling off periods or trying to get inside the killer's head, at least not right away.
Exactly. While those elements might come into play later in the investigation, the initial definition is very straightforward. It's about recognizing a potential pattern of predatory behavior. Nothing more, nothing less.
Makes sense. It gives law enforcement a concrete framework to operate within without getting lost in the psychological weeds. But I imagine there's a lot more to understanding these crimes than just a definition, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Let's-
And that's where things get really interesting and complex.
Hmm.
This is where the whole nature versus nurture debate rears its head. The FBI is very clear. There's no magic formula, no single factor that, boom, creates a serial killer.
So it's not as easy as just saying, oh, they had a bad childhood, or they must have some gene that makes them violent.
Nope, not even close. It's never that simple. The FBI actually uses the analogy of a recipe. You need a very specific combination of ingredients, both biological and environmental, for things to really go bad.
Okay, I like that analogy.
Right.
So walk us through this recipe a bit. What are some of these key ingredients?
Well, you might have someone who's genetically predisposed to certain traits, like impulsivity or aggression. Then maybe layer on a significant head injury that affects impulse control, right? On top of that, add a traumatic childhood abuse, neglect, exposure to violence, that sort of thing.
And then factors like social isolation or substance abuse, even mental illness, those could all contribute to the mix as well, right?
It's like each additional factor acts as a tipping point, pushing someone closer and closer to the edge. However, and this is crucial, the FBI emphasizes that the final ingredient is always choice.
That's a really important distinction to make. They're not robots acting on some pre-programmed impulse. They are making a conscious decision to harm others.
100%. And that element of choice, it fundamentally changes how investigators approach these cases. It shifts the focus from why did this person become a killer to how do we prevent them from choosing to kill again? See the difference?
Absolutely. It's a subtle but significant shift. And speaking of getting inside the criminal mind, I think it's time we talk about the elephant in the room, or should I say, the psychopath in the true crime podcast. Because it seems like every time we talk about serial killers, the term psychopath inevitably comes up.
Rightfully so. But it's important to clarify that not all serial killers are psychopaths, and not all psychopaths are serial killers.
Yeah.
There's definitely a connection, but it's not a one-to-one relationship.
Okay, so it's more nuanced than that.
Aye.
But there is a significant link.
Absolutely. And a lot of the FBI's understanding of that link stems from the work of Dr. Robert Hare. He's the one who developed the gold standard for diagnosing psychopathy, the Hare psychopathy checklist.
Which, for those of us who aren't experts in criminal psychology, can you give us a quick rundown?
Sure. Essentially, the checklist measures a cluster of personality traits that are frequently observed in psychopaths. Things like superficial charm, a grandiose sense of self-worth, pathological lying, lack of remorse or empathy, impulsivity, disregard for social norms. You get the idea.
So basically, a recipe for manipulation and a lack of conscience. It's like their moral compass is wired completely differently.
You could say that. And those traits, they can make psychopaths incredibly good at deceiving others, which is a pretty unsettling thought. They can blend in, gain your trust, all while lacking the capacity for genuine empathy.
It's chilling.
It really is.
Mhm.
But there's a silver lining here, right? Because by understanding these traits, investigators are better equipped to predict their behavior, maybe even use it against them.
Exactly. The FBI talks about how understanding a psychopath's narcissism, their inflated ego, can actually be a useful tool during interrogations.
So instead of trying to appeal to a conscience that might not be there, you appeal to their vanity, get them bragging about their crimes almost. You got it. There have actually been cases where investigators have gotten confessions just by stroking the killer's ego, feeding into their need to feel superior, smarter than everyone else.
That's both fascinating and terrifying, honestly. Okay, let's switch gears a bit and talk about motives. We've already established that it's not always about some kind of, sexual gratification. So what are some of the other driving forces behind these crimes? What makes a serial killer tick?
Well, it's rarely straightforward. Even the FBI cautions against getting too caught up in the psychology of it all, especially early on in an investigation. The truth is, motive is often messy.
So less armchair analysis, more focus on the tangible evidence, the facts of the case.
Precisely. The way a crime is committed, the patterns that emerge, those are your best bet for understanding the why.
So if we're not always looking for that one single clear-cut motive, what kind of categories are we talking about?
Well, the FBI outlines a few broad categories to consider. Anger, financial gain, a need for control, sometimes psychosis, and yeah, sometimes I is sexually driven. But the real takeaway is this. Let the evidence guide you, not your assumptions. Don't jump to conclusions.
It's like each case is a puzzle, and the motive is that final piece that helps you see the whole picture.
Exactly. And that understanding is crucial for investigators. Which actually brings us to the final vital piece of our deep dive today. How are these cases actually investigated? What are the best practices for catching these individuals?
Right, because knowing the theory is one thing, but out there in the real world, with the pressure on, how do you actually stop a serial killer in their tracks?
Well, you'd be surprised. The FBI found that one of the first hurdles is simply recognizing that you have a serial case on your hands. Might seem obvious, but especially in the early days, it was a huge stumbling block.
Especially with cases like the Green River killings, right, where you had all these vulnerable women going missing, but it took time for investigators to connect the dots.
Exactly. And those delays, they can be incredibly costly.
Yeah.
So the FBI really stresses the need for strong, decisive leadership in these investigations, task forces that can work together seamlessly, without egos or information silos getting in the way.
So less about different departments trying to crack the case on their own and more about presenting a united front.
Absolutely. It's about sharing information quickly and efficiently, having a clear chain of command, making sure everyone understands their role and how it fits into the bigger picture.
And I imagine that also involves respecting the different areas of expertise that go into cracking these cases.
You got it. The FBI actually highlights the vital role of data analysis in these investigations. They emphasize that sometimes even the smallest detail, something that seems totally insignificant at first, like, say, a type of fiber found on a victim, that can be the key to breaking a case wide open.
It's like that saying, the devil is in the details. Except in this case, it's justice, not the devil, that's hiding in plain sight.
Exactly. And it's that meticulous, often painstaking work uncovering those details that can be the difference between a cold case and a conviction. One case that really highlights this is the Richard Evanitz case. Are you familiar with that one?
Oh, right. Wasn't he linked to 3 murders, like years after the crimes, because of fibers from his bath mat?
Precisely. That tiny detail, initially overlooked, ended up being the crucial piece of evidence. It just goes to show why having those dedicated forensic experts, those analysts who can spot those connections, is so absolutely vital.
Wow, this has been heavy stuff, I'm not gonna lie. But honestly, so eye-opening serial murder, it's not just the stuff of movies, it's terrifyingly real.
It is. But as we've learned today, knowledge is power. The more we understand the reality of these crimes, the patterns, the motives, the psychology involved, the better equipped we are as a society to prevent them.
I love that. Maybe that's a good place to leave it for today. A better understanding of the darkness so we can all fight for the light. Thanks for diving deep with us on this one. And to everyone listening, we want to hear from you. What's your big takeaway from all of this? How do you think understanding these FBI insights might change the way we view true crime? Let us know. And hey, who knows? Maybe we'll be unpacking it in a future episode. Until then, stay curious, stay informed, and stay safe out there.